On this episode of Supervision Simplified, we are going to be talking about the changing landscape of supervisors, supervisees, and employers and employees all across the generations, from the traditionalists to baby boomers and Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, all the things. So stay tuned. Make sure that you check it out and see where you line up.
Hello, and welcome to Supervision Simplified. I am Dr. Amy Parks.
And I'm Valarie Harris.
We are excited to have you back with us today. We're going to be talking about Gen Z and millennials as supervision seekers, supervisees in the workplace. And we're going to share some data with you from the world out there that has been shared with us, and try to connect some dots for you about these individuals who are coming from different generations in the workforce into group practices and into supervision, into CSBs, and into different parts of our field as supervisees, and how they're showing up, how we can support them as supervisors, and what to expect, maybe what we're seeing that we didn't expect, and a whole lot more. So we're going to just dive right into that. How are you today, by the way, Valarie?
I'm doing really well. And I'm excited that we're going to talk about this. I feel like this will be one of many conversations. And as you may guess, like one part of this that we're going to share, I already have someone putting together a way to assess my staff to see where they show up on this chart, to see what parts connect to them. So
So I had to really dig in. So we're going to show you, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll get a chance to see this chart. And if you're not, we're going to share it on the show notes. And this comes from Purdue University. We're just going to show you, just quickly, a view of this chart that we're sort of using for reference. And this gives us a sort of an idea of different parts of the workforce. So this generational differences in the workforce or in the workplace shows us from Purdue Global, different generations. So the traditionalists born 1925 to 1945, baby boomers born 1946 to 1964, Generation X born 1965 to 1980. So that's me. I didn't know I was Generation X, but I guess I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
but you probably don't connect all of that. And
no, because
the neat point is that people will connect to different parts of this.
Right. I guess I think I thought I was a boomer, but I'm not. Millennials, which are 1981 to 2000. And then Generation Z, which is 2001 to 2020. So we're probably seeing supervisees who are millennials or Generation Z. And then supervisees who are most likely, possibly millennials. And then most likely, though, Generation X and maybe also boomers, right?
You mean supervisors? Yes.
Sorry. Supervisors that are possibly millennials.
Yes.
And then most likely Generation X and maybe boomers. So
I'm on the end of X.
Yeah. So a lot of overlap here. And so we're going to take this off because we want you to see our gorgeous faces. But we will give you access to that chart because we think it's really valuable to be viewing. And that's what we're referencing while we're talking today, that particular chart, because we think it's really a good one. And we're going to be talking more about that. So so I didn't actually even realize what I was, I guess.
Well, I would say it's probably because you don't connect to all the parts of that. My husband, for instance, was definitely not born in the traditionalist era. He was born in he's technically a Gen X on the very end in 1980, but he is 100% more like a traditionalist and a boomer in every sense of the word. So, and that has to do with how he was raised and who raised him. And so I think that we can't just lump our people in by this. That's why I'm going to do the assessment, is I think we have to see what parts of it resonate with them, but we are definitely on a trend level seeing a lot more of this, which is why it's throwing all the things for loops.
Yeah. So a couple things that are true, if we're talking about supervisors, which we're really going to focus more on the supervisees, but just to kind of give you a little bit of a framework. If we're talking about supervisors that are in the Generation X, that's born 1965 to 1980. So by 2028, so just 4 years from now, Generation Xers will outnumber baby boomers, completely outnumber them. 55% of Generation Xers are startup founders. So the highest percentage of startup founders are Generation Xers, which doesn't surprise me. So many
Nope.
people I know have started up their own businesses. And there's a communication style that's very sort of traditional or endemic or of this generation, of this group. And that is whatever is the most efficient, including phone calls and face to face. Communication style is whatever's most efficient. This group is flexible, informal, skeptical, and independent, according to
Mhm.
this chart. Worldview talks about favoring diversity, quick to move on their employer if their employer fails to meet their needs, resistant to change at work if it affects their personal lives. So I thought that those were kind of some interesting things. No longer really are we seeing the majority of people coming into work where we're looking at achievement coming after paying one's dues or sacrificing for success. That just doesn't really exist anymore.
Not as much, not as mu
No.
unless I contend and will say, I believe that it's still there. I've seen it within some of my own team, and they're actually technically millennials and Gen Z, some of them. But in those where you see that, it was something that, was imparted to them in how they were raised, whereas I saw parents who were loyal to companies who hated their companies they worked for at times, and I was like, "Well, then why are you still staying there?"
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that had me disregarding parts of their generation.
Yeah. So, according to this Purdue Global study, or this research data collected here, the millennial generation, born 1981 to 2000, 75% of this generation represents the percentage of the global workforce is made up of these millennials. So, 75%. It says the percentage of the global workforce is made up of millennials by 2025. So 75% will be made up of this work of millennials. Does
Woo,
that still huge?
that is, like,
75%.
mind-blowing
I
to
know that
me.
is mind blowing. It is mind blowing.
Not in
And
a
it
bad way, it just
no.
feels like they were just babies, so like, not that long ago.
And you know what else is also that this generation is shaped by Columbine, by
Mhm.
9/11, and by the internet. Competitive, civic and open-minded, achievement-oriented. Now get it, let's be really clear. This is just a snapshot. This doesn't represent everyone.
Sure.
This just is a data. This is a snapshot of data. So this is, let's be clear that we're
These are
just this is
generalizations.
all generalizations,
Yeah.
but communication styles, instant messages, text, and email. So gone are the days of face to face and phone calls. Anyway, just wanted to just make a little joke about that. Um,
Mhm.
but these are the people that are most likely in group practices and in academia. They are adjuncts, new people to the profession, new professors, and or your clinical director, your supervisors, but they might not be your practice owners. So these are your leadership team. These are people that are coming in that have been in the field for 15
Mhm.
years, 10 to 15 years. So they're experienced, most likely, and yet, but maybe not. They could still be quite on the younger side because if they're at the end of millennial, they born in 2000, they're still only 24 years old. So they still could be early career people. So it just depends on, really who they are. But what it says about their worldview here, I think, is the most important part. Seeking challenge, growth, and development, a fun work life and work life balance. Likely to leave an organization if they don't like change. What do you think about that?
I think it's interesting. I was born in '80. My oldest was born in 1999. And you know, it's I will say that, he definitely is a phone person, but and relates to some of the Gen Z stuff. But I will say my experience definitely has been that if, especially my own practice, change was a definite change. Like where there was change, if if there were people that fell into that and did not want to be part of that, then that was it for them. And it didn't even matter if they understood the change. It was almost like that was almost irrelevant. Even if like you could have, you know, because there were attempts to create clarity, and I don't even think that's what mattered. I think it's just, no, I don't like this. So I think that's what they refer to oftentimes is those are your quiet quitters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who are just going to do the bare minimum while they're finding their next job.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't see the current mm, I think it's interesting. This seeking challenge, growth, and development. Mm, I don't know if I see it.
I don't see it very much. I do for some. I definitely see the piece about a fun work life and work life balance. Like
Uh
so
huh.
much so that in the beginning of my practice, I actually paid my people all quite a bit more starting out. And I think it's because I fall a lot more into a place of being I mean, I feel valued when I'm paid well. And so I assumed that was how they felt valued and actually had some come to me and they were like, I would rather be expected to see a few less people get paid a little less and like have some PTO instead. And I just remember being floored by that. Like, really? Like, I would rather just get paid more and save my money and take time off. But then, others would, say to me, but you're the owner of the practice. Like, you run, like, there are two different types of people. And like, you're setting this up based on how you have a worldview and how you see things and things you prefer. And they're doing things in a very different way. And they're going to have different needs and different wants and feel valued. And that was the first time for me where I was like, we are not the same, are we? Okay. We are not
Right.
the same. That was a really yeah, I mean, obviously didn't think we were the same, but there's a certain time in your age where you think you're not that much younger than me. So it's really easy to make the assumption that you both value similar things in the workplace when that's just absolutely not true.
Yeah, and I think it's really challenging. I mean, it's difficult. Like I try really hard to understand what motivates people and what motivates my supervisees and my team to be, to feel supported, to feel
Mhm.
aligned. And I really work hard on that. And at the same time, I feel like I'm constantly missing the mark, constantly. No matter how much I study. So here's a couple other things. According to this Purdue Global, the millennial generation is motivated by responsibility, the quality of their manager, and unique work experiences. Maybe, maybe. I think I'm jaded by the Generation Z because I don't think that any of that's true for Generation Z. So I don't have enough, maybe, of the older millennials. Um, to sort of have that perspective.
Yeah, the Gen Z I do struggle with a little bit because my like youngest falls into that. He's absolutely none of those things. And even my oldest isn't. But what I will say that I think they kind of fall into a little bit is like they don't care nearly as much about social media. I'm guessing they did at one time, but one of the things they do both kind of agree upon because I had presented this to them is anti-corporate, like anti-corporate all the way is a big deal. Like they
Are
don't
you talking about Gen Z?
yeah, like it's
Yeah, so
more
let's
this
look at that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, idea of being anti-corporate and I do see that in my practice. And I will say, like you said, you really study that. I had not in the beginning until I realized obviously there was a need. And then I started to study it. And you're right. I continue to also feel like I was missing the mark. Now I've just been very candid and opening these things up to my team because we have a really good team right now. And I've said, there's this real gap in communication between this generation and these people who have this position in our field and then these. what do you think is contributing to that? Because I'm just like thoroughly trying to understand it. And one of the things that came out that I feel like really did make a difference and did help me connect some of this is the Gen Z, by and large, and even some of the millennials, they want you to earn their respect. It is not, and that is very true of my kids. So that floats between my experience with my employees and my kids. Is it's very much this, just because you're the adult and you're the leader and you have all these things and you have more experience, like, yeah, I'll give you respect, but you're always at risk of losing my respect very quickly. And versus some of the more, older generations, I think there was always an inherent respect because of position. And I find that that's not necessarily as true anymore. In fact, when we did an employment engagement survey, one of the things we did is we listed a lot of different values in the workplace. And not just values, but values pertaining to roles. So, a mentor versus someone who's a leader and one of the things that they most are like valued was being adaptable to change, or being steady and dependable. One of the things they least valued was leadership. And I was like, and it was stated in such a way that it wasn't trying to say like, what's your favorite role in a company? It was really stated in a way of like, what types of things do you think should be rewarded and valued as far as like how they work in a company. And that helped me understand they really, positions don't matter to them nearly as much as whether or not they get a seat at the table with transparent communication.
Yeah, well, that lines up exactly with what it says here, the worldview of Generation Z, which is 2001 to 2020. Self-identity as digital device addicts, value independence and individuality, prefer to work with millennial managers, innovative coworkers, and new technologies. And so, motivated by diversity, personalization, individuality, and creativity, and communication styles, social media, texts, and instant messaging. Um, so, this leads us to the question of how do we, um, how do we, how do we recognize these individuals as supervisees? How do we work with them to give them a sense of independence and individuality in a field that is frankly kind of old? I mean,
And with really old practices,
and very
old
old.
systems that functioned as part of oppressive systems at that,
Exactly.
historically, and
Exactly.
don't really speak to that,
Is
which
not
is
innovative.
also, yeah, right.
Like I was teaching the other day and we were talking and they said, I was saying they were saying something like, when we graduate, what are some things that we should be thinking about in terms of training? And I was just kind of like laughed to myself thinking, oh, there's a whole world of stuff that you didn't even learn about in grad school. Again, no criticism of grad school because it just is what it is, but
Sure.
there's no EMDR, DBT, brain spotting, none of these
Basic
modalities.
trauma sometimes,
Right.
basic
There's no
brain.
right in-depth trauma research training. There's none of these. No brain oriented, cognitive research strategies for ADHD. None of that. None of that is done in grad school. So I'm thinking, well, you have a whole world. Play therapy. Like that's not even a class. Like you have a whole world of stuff
Exactly.
to learn afterwards. So if Generation Z and millennials are our supervisees, and by the way, one of the other statistics on here is that for millennials, 18% of millennial men and 12% of millennial women are millennials ages 25 to 34 are still living at home with their parents. FYI. If those are the individuals that are our supervisees, how do we help them seek challenge and growth? How do we help them, um, you know, learn from organizations and stick there long enough to finish their supervision? How do we help them to feel challenged and yet independent in these kind of environments?
I've been trying to solve this and will die on this hill forever because I really felt like prior to there being group practices, you only had agency work in like treatment centers or psych hospitals. And so I really believed that a group practice could be for the the intern, the new clinician. It could be like the perfect marriage between a visionary who wanted to be innovative and disrupt the industry, and you have these newbies over here who are passionate, full of zeal, who want meaningful work, and they also want to be disruptors of the industry. And so
Mhm.
to me, I'm like, ah, this is the beautiful, most perfect marriage there could ever be. And then you go into this marriage and you're like, skirt, why y'all so unhappy all the time? Like, and like, then you have practice owners who are like, I don't know if I want to do this. Like, this is a lot. Like, everybody's always unhappy, and I'm trying to give here and I'm trying to give there. And I'm going like, what are we missing? Because, if practice owners eventually just leave the field and we don't have these groups anymore, then it goes back to these supervisees and these interns going back to community mental health. And like, it's like, I'm trying to figure out how to bridge that gap. So one of the things that I have learned, and I think it's just worth stating, is I really struggled with messaging that I had probably been given, messaging that I had gotten as an employee in businesses before. So there were parts of those things I wanted to change. Like I wanted to pay better than I was paid when I graduated. So I sought to do that. But in doing a lot of the things I did, I made a lot of assumptions versus actually just connecting to my people and asking lots of curious questions to understand what makes your work meaningful, what makes your work hard. I will forever tout, I don't have it by me, but there's this great book on employee retention. It's the thinnest little book there is. And it's taught me more than anything else. And it's made such beautiful conversations in supervision and about career development. And it's really finding out their shoves and their tugs. Like, what are the things that push you out the door? What are the things that make this feel like it's not the place for you? And then what are the things that draw you in and make you want to be here? And having them identify their values in general in what it is they value. And so doing even a values assessment and getting under what feels limiting. And these generations are generations, I think, who were taught to go against corporations,
Yeah.
to not fall into that, to not become that, to not align with that. And I think when they don't have transparency around numbers, and it doesn't mean you got to open the checkbook and you open the bank account, but when they don't have transparency around how things are done, why they're done that way, then they don't feel like they have the ability within the organization to create change, to be innovative, and they're constantly, I think it creates anxiety for them around, am I really just low key being part of another small corporation where I can't make a difference? And
Mm.
so one of the things that I've really been doing a lot more of is just putting it all out there, all of it. And in the beginning, I didn't, because I've always wanted to do that, but I had people coming to me that were like, that makes me anxious when you talk about numbers. So eventually I just said, well, I'm going to talk about numbers. And if that makes you anxious, this may not be the place for you. And I don't mean that to be harm. It's truth. And I think that was what was needed. And I think that we got the team we needed. And it has been so much better because they're starting to understand so much more, and they're able to speak into that and say, I wonder if we did this different. And I might say, well, I thought of that, but there's this. And then they're like, oh, that makes sense. As practice owners, oftentimes I think a lot of times people didn't want to open that up because they're like, I'm going to give them too much and they're going to run off and do it. And
So, yeah. So for supervisees, being able to say, like, when you are in a practice, being able to, or when in your workplace, look for places that are able to give you that kind of transparency.
yeah, but
Mhm.
I think they also have to first see what they value. And sometimes they think they value one thing, but they're not sure unless actually do that work. And so there's a really good values assessment that they can do. There's lots of them out there to really get at the core of what that top value is. And then for themselves, even defining how do you recognize that? So, how do you
Mhm.
recognize that in a relationship with your supervisor? How do you see that there's alignment? What does alignment look like in the workplace? What feeds against that?
Mhm.
And because what we're seeing, of course, now, which we'll talk more about later, is just in another episode, is this trend towards I'm going to go out on my own, but then I'm going to jump in with Alma and Headway. And it's like, so you didn't want to be part of a group practice because you wanted autonomy, but you really just jumped into a mega group practice.
Right. A massive
Um,
one.
yeah. And
Right.
so and I think that they don't understand because that's the real like sleight of hand is they're thinking, well, I'm
Right.
getting paid more and this is my practice. And it's actually just became part of a mega group practice who's taking a cut of everything that you're getting from them session wise, just like a practice. And they're not giving you benefits and they're not paying for supervision, all those
Right.
things. So it
Right.
almost seems like the clarity has not been there around helping them identify what those values are. And sometimes they may know them, but even knowing how to see them in those relationships and in the workplace and how to challenge them correctly or how to see if those are places that they could stay or if they can communicate those things. And those are things that we could help them with.
Yeah. I think that that's really, I want to be able to help. And then part of me is just like, I tried to tell you, but you just didn't listen. But it's not really very, I guess that's not very helpful, friendly way of handling it. But I do know that there's a lot of conversations to be had around a lot of these specific issues. You've mentioned two resources. So you're going to have to make a note because we're going to have to add them at some point. The one is the book. So
Hmm.
make a note to yourself right now before you forget the little thin book
Yes.
that you
Yes.
referenced and the values assessment. So people,
Yes.
you know how people are and we love our people and they're going to say, Valarie mentioned the values
I
assessment and
know.
Valarie's mentioned the book. So we will
Yes.
absolutely include those. If not in our show notes, we'll have them for you in our next episode. Valarie will whip them out and then
Yes,
we'll
and I
have
would
those for you.
love to get the author of that book. I think his name is Mark Murphy. He's written lots of books on leadership as well, and
Great.
a lot of his content. He has a lot of free assessments also. I think it's like the Leadership IQ
Great.
Institute. So there's lots of free resources there, some of which you can even take and get an idea of what the culture of your organization is. So lots of things that could actually help with supervisors who have supervisees or, just in general. There's just a lot of good. I really feel like there's so much parallel between leadership and supervision.
Absolutely. So put him on our dream interview list.
Yes, I will.
So a couple interesting statistics also that were included in this Purdue Global. It says 60%, 67% of Gen Zers want to work at companies where they can learn skills to advance their careers.
Hmm.
67% of Gen Zers want to work at companies where they can learn skills to advance their careers. Great. So that tells me that 60%, 7% of people want to go to places where they can get supervision so that they can become licensed and grow and develop in their skills. So yay, I'm all about that. I think that that's fantastic.
And can I like offer something to take this one step further of how this can actually really work in a really beautiful way? Um, we ask people to stay, well, we ask them to commit to staying 2 years past licensure. And I had a new supervisee, an employee who had been an intern, come forward and say, I'm not sure that we'll be able to do that. Um, for reasons that are related to military and what would that look like. And so I sat and I thought, And I already knew that this person, this is their second career. They have a really strong history as a teacher. There's lots of great things there. And this person had already been very clear with me about their long-term goals and having a similar type of practice to ours, if not a franchise of that in another state. And so knowing that, I thought, well, what if we did, instead of paying for it and instead of the 2-year requirement, since that may not be an option, what if we did like a GA position of sorts, call it something else, where this person can then be almost like a leadership assistant and be on the inner workings of the leadership team hour for hour around supervision. So for every hour of supervision, there's maybe an hour that's committed to working on some task, and it will give them that hands-on experience around running a practice and doing some of these things, because it aligns very well with the long-term goals. And it was an absolute, like, this person was like, oh my gosh, absolutely, I would love to do that.
Wow.
And so it those things are very meaningful to them. And I
And I
think so
yeah.
much of us want to hold back these things out of fear. And in reality, like, those things gain their trust.
And I think that that's super innovative. And I think the more we can do that kind of thing, the better. A last statistic I'll share here, and then I want to take a couple minutes to look at this article as well. 80% of Gen Zers believe that their employer should provide direct training for them. So
And pay for
80%
it.
and
And
pay
they
for it.
and
Yeah,
pay for time. I can't tell you how many times I've had people say, "Well, I haven't had time on my schedule to study for the NCE,"
right.
or "When do I take this training? How am I supposed to take that and see these clients?" And, like, we've never, like, that was
Yeah,
like, I
that's a
would have
really big
never
conflict.
asked an employer that. Like,
That's a really big conflict. So, on the one hand, I do think that providing supervision is something that we should do as employers. I don't pay them to be supervised, though. They pay us.
well, sure, and that's
So,
because I don't require them to be in supervision. The state of Tennessee does.
exactly, exactly.
Mhm.
And I don't require. I mean, in order to be licensed, they have to take the exam. So that's a really interesting sort of conflict there. I mean,
But again, I think it goes back to this adage, of I'm doing things to benefit this practice. And if my time is not being honored, valued, like, unless they understand, and you can gap the communication piece of that to give them the clarity and give them the information they need to make the connections, it just feels, I think, like a sleight of hand to them.
hmm hmm So, I agree with you. So, I want to also reference, and we just have a couple of minutes left, but I want to reference another article that I recently read, and we'll add it in the show notes. And it's by an excellent author. His name is Josh Bersin. And the article is, where was it published? I can't remember, but it's
Mhm.
Insights on Corporate Talent, Learning, and HR Technology. And I think that the most compelling quote in this article, and maybe you can find where it was published, Valarie. But anyway, the most compelling quote in this was, rather than blindly trust employers, people today bring high expectations to work. Young workers don't expect to become the job, they want the job to become them, often called job crafting. And given the shortage of workers in every role, this trend is just getting bigger.
Mhm.
What do you think about that?
I would agree that that is a part of it. When I asked this, it looks like it was just posted on his website, but it looks like there may be a podcast episode that goes with this. Um, when I asked my team about this, it wasn't so much that they said they expect everything to become them, but I will say that they very much made it clear that their generation wants to be part of change and innovation. And if they feel either that the company they work for is not aligned with their values and is not actionable in that alignment, in terms of, like, from an impact standpoint are moving towards that, or if they don't feel they have a voice within their company,
right.
they're out. Like, I really believe those are very much the quiet quitters is, and so I think the more that those conversations can just be normalized. And I think that's gonna, I mean, I hate to say this because, I like to, I don't like change all the time either. So I hate to say this, but I feel like that's the growth piece for a lot of us in our older generations. And it's been very uncomfortable for us because it flies in the face of everything we've known about employment. You know what I mean? Like, I can't imagine anyone would go to a Fortune 500 company and say, I really want to understand where the money all goes. Like, you would
Mhm.
just, that would, like, they would
Right.
look at you like you'd lost your mind. And yet these people, that's exactly the kind of, it's, and not in a boldness or a rude way, but those are conversations they want to be part of.
Right.
Because it makes them feel like they are affecting change,
Yeah.
or that
Yeah.
they're not being taken advantage of. And maybe it's because they felt their parents were taken advantage of. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. I see a lot of parallels to what I'm seeing in my own practice and with my supervisees, and trying to figure out that balance of meeting their needs, but also trying to explain, like, this is why we do things this way. And I'm open to change. And yet at the same time, there are certain things that I can't change because they're this way for a reason.
Yes.
I do believe that we do certain things because we've learned from experience that they work.
Right. But if you think
And
about kids and parents, remember how often you had certain types of parents, and I know you see this. You have the some who believe you do what you're told and you don't ask questions.
right.
I'm the one that's over here going, how does this kid learn to think for themselves if they never understand the why? And so those two can often collide and butt heads parentally. But there's the third option of the obey first and then I'll explain,
Mhm.
which is
Mhm.
the show the respect piece, do the thing, and then let me offer the explanation so that you can learn. And so
Mhm.
I almost think that might be the blend for us, is it's sort of like it's not that it's not your business and that you're just being entitled, but at the same time, you are working for an organization. This is a business. And there are certain things that, I'm going to need you to do. And then we can have a conversation about that after the fact.
Right, exactly. Sometimes I get to the point of saying, "If you'd like to know why, I'm happy to tell you."
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
And I say that to supervisees all the time too. I'm happy to share more about that if you want to, if you want more explanation. And sometimes they say, "Oh yeah, I really want to understand that." Sometimes they're like, "No, it's fine."
Yeah, isn't it neat how some, like, who can even be in the same age group, some are like,
Right.
"No, I trust you," and then
Yeah.
others are like, "I would like to understand that," and
Yeah.
I'm like, "And I would like to understand the difference between you and your peer."
Right, exactly. Because why are there two different people, two different understandings
How
of the same
how
exact thing?
how would we not have, like, why would anyone be identical? I don't
No.
know.
Right, right, exactly. So this has been a really interesting conversation, Valerie. I appreciate your entertaining my curiosity around that graphic. I thought it was really, really interesting. It's been a very we've I know you and I have talked about it offline, and we've talked about it with a number of our other colleagues as well. And I think it's going to be continuing to be a conversation as we sort of explore, bringing in new supervisees that are graduating this May, and other people that are coming into the workforce, as we see a lot of new opportunities for them to get training, a lot of changes in the
Yeah.
training world and things like that. So I think it's going to be really neat. Anything else you want to add to the conversation before we close?
I think I would just say, if there are any of you out there who really want to talk about this, I would love to have y'all on the podcast,
Absolutely.
because we don't want to just sit here and make lots of blind assumptions and piece together our puzzles from our limited, pulling of people to try to learn from. We're open to learning from all of you out there who may say, you're close, but that's not entirely accurate. That's not how I feel. We want to hear your voice. So this is not us saying that we have in any means conquered this or that we have found the way. It's more of saying, like, we're aware that there are differences out there. We want to understand them better. We want to understand how to help supervisors embrace some of this and how we can be better as supervisors, and also elevate your voices as well, because you are the future of the industry, and y'all have great ideas, and there are things that we may be still stuck in old ways, and we need to be challenged and grow. So we would love to keep having these conversations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for so much for tuning in to Supervision Simplified. The revolution starts with you. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your network. And as Valarie mentioned, we're really eager for your comments, for your stories, for your feedback, for your criticism, for your comments, and to ensure that we're hitting on the right topics that you care about. Keep simplifying and elevating your supervision game. And until our next episode, we'll see you again soon.
Bye.